My name is Ella Hartman and this past fall I turned 68. Thanksgiving has always been the day I try to hold on to my late husband's traditions. The pies cooling on the back porch, the folding chairs borrowed from the neighbors, the quiet prayer before the meal. This year though, I could already feel a storm beneath the smell of thyme and roasted turkey. I moved through my kitchen with practiced hands, wiping counters, adjusting the foil over the bird. The football game hummed low from the living room, but it didn't cover the sound of my son Mark's voice when he shouted from the doorway, "Mom, where's the carving knife?" His tone carried something clipped, impatient, like he had grown up in another house. Sienna, my daughter-in-law, swept in behind him, one arm cradling a casserole dish, the other balancing her phone on a small tripod. Vegan green bean casserole. "My followers asked for the recipe," she announced, brightly to no one in particular. She set the dish down with a flourish, making sure her camera had the angle. Lily, my 9-year-old granddaughter, slipped close to me, pressing against my hip whenever Sienna angled her phone in our direction. I rested my hand lightly on her shoulder, steadying her, steadying myself. I wanted to believe this would still be a family day, but the way Mark and Sienna exchanged glances felt like a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. By 3 o'clock, the house was crowded. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. Children ran between rooms and coats piled in the hallway. Closet. I carried a silent list in my head. Turn off the oven. Watch the gravy. Don't let the noise show how tired I really was. When the plates were finally filled, I bowed my head and offered grace, short and honest. When I opened my eyes, Mark had already begun slicing into the turkey. Sienna lifted her glass high. "To new traditions," she said, her smile bright as a spotlight. Around the table, voices echoed her toast, but the words felt foreign in my own house. Lily leaned toward me and whispered, "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled for her sake, but something inside me shifted. The kind of quiet tremor that warns you the ground will not hold steady for long. The plates clattered as we squeezed around the table, the borrowed chairs bending under restless children and tired adults. I tried to arrange the serving dishes down the center like I always had, but the chatter swallowed the little rituals. Mark was scrolling on his phone with one hand while his other carved through the turkey as though the prayer had been a pause he couldn't wait to end. I passed Lily the bread basket and she nestled closer, watching me more than the food. Sienna set her phone upright on the mantel, angling it to catch the whole table. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and raised her glass again. "Here's to family moving forward, to building new traditions," she declared, her tone as polished as an advertisement. Glasses clinked, some hesitant, some too loud, one hard enough to chip. I lifted my water, but didn't echo her words. They didn't feel like mine. I thought about the years I had stood in this same kitchen with flour up to my wrists, planning every course while my husband fixed the folding table legs. We had never needed new traditions. The old ones had carried us just fine. Mark looked up finally, his eyes landing on me as though remembering I was there. "Mom," he said, almost casual. "What are you planning for winter?" "We've been talking, and you shouldn't be out there shoveling or worrying about the furnace anymore. Maybe it's time to scale back." I felt every ear at the table turn toward me. My hand stayed steady as I buttered a roll. "I don't shovel," I replied evenly. "Mr. Donnelly does it. He brings his own coffee because he says mine is too weak." Sienna laughed too quickly, her voice a pitch higher than comfort. We just mean you don't have to keep up with so much. It's a lot for you. I laid the roll gently on Lily's plate and said, it's my house. I'll decide what's too much. The table grew quiet and I saw Mark and Sienna trade that practice glance. The one couples learn when they want to speak without words. Halfway through the meal, conversation faltered as if everyone sensed a shift they couldn't name. Forks scraped against plates, glasses knocked against wood, but the rhythm was uneven. I could feel Sienna watching me while Mark kept his eyes on his phone, nodding at something only he could see. Then he set the device down deliberately. The way a man puts down a card he knows will end the game. Mom, he began, his voice careful, measured, almost rehearsed. You've been difficult lately. Everything turns into an argument. You forget things. And Sienna and I, we worry. You've become a burden. The words didn't crash over me like a wave. They punctured slowly, like a tire losing air on a highway, pulling you to the side before you realize you're fighting the wheel. Chairs creaked. Someone's fork dropped and stayed where it landed. From the living room, the football game murmured on, oblivious. Lily's hand found my sleeve and clung. I folded my napkin as if I were raising a small flag. Steady, deliberate. I made the stuffing the way your father liked it, I said, my voice even without a quiver. Then I stood and gathered plates that weren't yet empty. If anyone wants pie, it's on the porch. Mom, Mark started, but I was already in the kitchen sliding pies onto the counter. Under a bulb that made everything look too honest. The faucet ran, though no dish needed rinsing. My ears filled with a ringing no one else could hear. Sienna followed, lowering her voice as if she could soften what had already been carved into me. He didn't mean it like that. He's overwhelmed. I didn't turn. He said exactly what he meant, and he meant it for everyone to hear. Behind me, Lily's small voice cut the air. Grandma, can I have the corner piece? I handed her both corners, heavy with sugar and spice, and watched her carry the plate out as though she carried me, too. The house thinned out. Slowly after dessert, laughter forced. Coats pulled from the closet without looking me in the eye. When the last car door shut and the engine faded down the street, silence spread through the walls. Like a tide reclaiming the shore. I stood alone in the kitchen, the smell of turkey skin and burnt edges clinging to the air. Mark came back through the doorway, his steps heavy. We're trying to help, he said, like he was speaking to a stubborn child. You make it hard. I shut off the faucet I hadn't realized was still running. My reflection in the window stared back, lined, tired, but not broken. Help. I repeated. Is that what you call it? He didn't answer. He hugged me before leaving, careful, almost afraid to touch me. The kind of hug you give a fragile stranger. Then he was gone. Upstairs, I pulled out the carry-on suitcase I hadn't used in years. My hands moved without hesitation. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of warm socks, the blue sweater Lily always said made my eyes kind. I slipped my passport into the inside pocket. Not because I planned to use it, but because it felt like power. On the kitchen table, I left a note where Mark would find it if he came back for leftovers. I'll be fine. Please water the plant. At dawn, the town still slept under a thin blue haze. I locked the front door from the outside for the first time in decades and tucked the key deep into my coat pocket. As I slid behind the wheel, the seat creaked with the weight of my decision. The street stretched ahead, empty and pale. By the time the sun touched the church steeple at the end of Maple Drive, I was already gone. The road hummed beneath my tires, each mile stretching like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I hadn't driven far. Just far enough that if Mark returned that morning, he'd find the porch empty, the pies cold, and the kitchen stripped of its host. For the first time in years, I didn't leave a forwarding plan. I simply drove. At a gas station outside Mill Creek, the neon buzzed as though it had been awake longer than me. I parked, cut the engine, and sat gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. Inside, the clerk barely looked up when I bought a burnt cup of coffee and a spiral notebook. That anonymity was the point. Back in the car, steam curled from the coffee lid, rising like a signal to no one. I opened the notebook and wrote the first line with a hand that shook but didn't falter. He called me a burden. Today, I became invisible by choice. By noon, I was 2 counties over, sitting in the corner of a small town library that smelled of dust and crayons. The carpet muffled every step, and the bulletin board still advertised last summer's fair. I spread the notebook open on the table and began to write the things no one at that Thanksgiving table would remember. Mark's braces paid in cash while I skipped a new winter coat. The mortgage refinanced twice so he could finish college. The hospital nights when Sienna miscarried. And I sat praying while Mark cried in a hallway. Lily's first steps taken in my kitchen while her parents were too busy filming a holiday promotion. The words poured until my hand cramped. Proof on the page that I had never been a burden. I had been the scaffolding, the quiet backbone that carried them all. I closed the notebook, slid it into my bag, and for the first time that day, exhaled without apology. Back at the house, the silence was heavier than the day before. Mark unlocked the door with the spare key he still carried, expecting to hear the creak of the upstairs floorboard, the faint whistle of the kettle, the rhythm that had always marked his childhood home. Instead, the rooms answered with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. On the kitchen table lay a single sheet of paper, short as a grocery list. "I'll be fine. Please water the plant. Mark." Read it once, twice, then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange into something softer. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he didn't move. Sienna walked in behind him, her eyes sweeping the counters, the sink, the familiar clutter that wasn't there. "She left," she whispered, though the note was clear enough. Mark shoved the paper toward her. "That's all she wrote." From the doorway, Lily appeared, her backpack still slung on one shoulder. "Is Grandma mad at us?" she asked, her voice small, trembling around the edges. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came. Sienna knelt, trying to shape her face into something gentle. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. She just needed a little break. But the girl's frown deepened. Even at 9 o'clock, she knew when adults were lying. That evening, the tension cracked open. Mark paced the living room, phone in hand, dialing neighbors, leaving voicemails with a voice he barely recognized. Sienna tried to reason with him, but her words tangled with accusation. "You were the one who said she couldn't manage on her own," Mark snapped. "And you were the one who called her a burden." Sienna shot back. Their argument ricocheted off the walls while Lily sat silent on the stairs, clutching her knees to her chest. She had lost the only steady voice at that table, and the house felt colder for it. The motel was the kind travelers forgot before they even left. A singlestory row of rooms. Curtains faded, a heater that rattled like it might quit any moment. I dropped my bag on the floral bedspread and sat at the edge, Shoes still on, staring at the lamp's yellow glow. The silence was louder than any holiday gathering. I pulled the notebook from my bag and opened to a fresh page. The words came slower this time, weighted with years I had tried not to catalog. It wasn't just Thanksgiving. It had been last winter, when Mark forgot to invite me to Lily's school concert. "We didn't want you out in the cold," he said later. Too casual, as if protecting meant cutting me out. It had been spring, when Sienna told me I didn't need to worry about Lily's piano lessons anymore, because Grandma gets confused with schedules. I had never missed a payment. Not once. It had been summer, when Mark wandered through my living room as though he were already measuring where his own furniture would go. "You should think about downsizing," he'd said, glancing at the walls that still held photographs of my life. 1,000 small cuts. That's what it was. Each one disguised as kindness, wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile. But the result was the same. I was being erased. In increments. My hand trembled as I wrote it down, but I kept going. I needed the evidence, even if only for myself. When the pen finally stilled, I closed the notebook and pressed it against my chest. The heater roared back to life, drowning out the ringing in my ears. For the first time, I whispered into the empty room. I was never the burden. I was the spine. And in that moment, I almost believed it. 2 days later, I turned the car back toward town. Not because I missed them, and not because I had softened, but because silence without truth felt like surrender. If I disappeared without speaking my piece, they would carry on, believing their version of me a fragile woman too tired to hold her own life. I couldn't let that be the final word. The porch light glowed as I pulled into the driveway. Both cars were there, lined up like guards. I stepped inside to find them waiting in my living room. Rehearsed expressions plastered across their faces. "Mom," Mark said quickly, crossing the room as though motion itself might erase the past. "Thank God you're back. We were worried." I shut the door behind me slowly, the sound echoing through the house that still belonged to me. "No, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "You weren't worried. You were planning what life might look like if I never came back." Sienna stepped forward. "Syrupy. Sweet. We just want what's best for you. You've been overwhelmed. And we thought best for me." My laugh cut sharp. "Don't stand in my living room and pretend it was about my health." I heard the whispers. Downsizing, guardianship, financial plans, all of it dressed up as concern, but the truth is simpler. You wanted what I built. Sienna's face hardened, the mask slipping. Mark shifted uncomfortably, trying again. "Mom, you're twisting this. Ava needs stability. She needs, don't you dare." I snapped, the thunder rising in my throat. "Don't you dare use that child as your shield. She saw your faces. She knows what disrespect looks like." Mark's mouth opened, but the words stalled. For the first time, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like a boy caught with the truth in his hands. The room held its breath, every wall listening. I stepped closer, my voice no longer trembling, but sharpened by years of silence. "You didn't stumble over that word, Mark. You didn't trip on it like an accident. You rehearsed it in your heart until it rolled off your tongue." And Sienna, I turned toward her. "You smiled because you had been feeding it to him." Sienna's lips parted, ready with some polished excuse, but I raised a hand. "No more." Lies. You wanted me smaller, quieter. Erased. You thought if you said burden loud enough, I'd believe it and hand you the keys to this house. But here I stand, and I am not erased. Mark's shoulders sagged, his eyes glossy. Mom, he whispered. I was frustrated. I didn't mean you meant every syllable. I cut in. Don't you dare dress it as a slip. Words like that don't fall out of nowhere. They grow, watered by contempt. Rehearsed until they land clean on the table for a child to hear. At the mention of Lily, both of them flinched. Do you understand what it does to a granddaughter to watch her father reduce his own mother to nothing? My voice cracked, but I didn't look away. That child is the only reason I bit my tongue as long as I did. But even she saw the truth. Mark covered his face with both hands. Sienna looked down at the rug, her jaw clenched. I drew in a steady breath, then released it like a verdict. You wanted my absence. Now live with it. You don't get to call me a burden one night and beg for my blessing the next. Not anymore. Silence pressed heavy, but for once it belonged to them, not me. I turned toward the doorway, my hand brushing the frame that had held decades of photographs, laughter, and arguments. My voice dropped lower, cold and deliberate. Let me make this simple for you. The next time you think of me as a burden, remember this. Burdens don't build houses. Burdens don't raise sons. Burdens don't hold families together when everyone else is too busy. Mark's shoulders shook, but he said nothing. Sienna bit her lip, her eyes flashing with the kind of fear that comes when a mask no longer fits. I picked up my keys from the side table, the metal cool in my palm. I was never your burden, I said. I was your blessing, and one day you'll regret the moment you threw me away. The door clicked shut behind me, the night air crisp against my skin. The porch light spilled across the yard, but it wasn't a welcome. It was a witness. I stepped down the stairs, each footfall steady, certain. Mark called my name once, the sound desperate, but I didn't look back. I pulled a chair into the front yard, sitting beneath the glow of the street lamps, the cold wrapped around me. Yet inside, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. Not the warmth of forgiveness, but of liberation. Behind me, the house stood in silence. And for the first time, that silence wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. I looked up at the November sky, the stars faint against the dark, and breathed deeply. I had been called a burden, erased in whispers and glances. But the truth was rooted in me. Unshakable. I was not their burden. I was the root. And roots do not disappear. They remain steady and alive, even when others lose their way. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.